I buried my son alone while my family toasted champagne just a few miles away. That sentence sounds impossible, doesn't it? But it's the truth. While I stood at the edge of the graveyard, watching the earth swallow the last piece of my heart, my siblings were laughing under fairy lights at a party they swore they couldn't postpone. The world is strange like that. Joy and grief can happen at the same moment, only divided by a road, a wall, or sometimes by blood. His name was Matthew, 36 years old. A man who carried more kindness in his little finger than most people carry in their whole lives. The cancer came quickly, and it took everything even faster. By the time we knew what we were fighting, the fight was already lost. Still, he battled like he always had, quietly, without complaint, making sure I was the one comforted, even when he was the one in pain. And yet, when it came time to say goodbye, only 7 people came. 7. Myself, the pastor, 2 men from the funeral home, his childhood friend Paul, an old girlfriend who had never stopped caring, and our elderly neighbor Mrs. Langley, who walked slowly with her cane, but said she would never forgive herself if she didn't come. That was all. No brothers. No sisters, no cousins, not even his grandmother. They all had a better reason. The better reason was a party. My sister Eleanor had chosen that exact Saturday, the day of Matthew's funeral, to hold her daughter's engagement celebration. She called me the night before with her syrupy voice that always hides a knife. "We can't cancel, Margaret. The hall is booked solid. The deposit is non-refundable. Everyone's expecting it. You understand, don't you?" I was holding Matthew's favorite mug when she said that. The one that read "Best Son Ever," which he gave me as a joke on Mother's Day when he was 17. I remember staring at it while she explained that her daughter's happiness mattered more than my son's death. I remember hearing myself whisper, "Of course, family comes first." Family, that word, has never felt so hollow. So there I was, sitting in the front pew of St. Andrew's Chapel, staring at rows of empty wooden benches. Mr. Jennings, the funeral director, kept glancing at me like maybe the missing faces would still appear. "Would you like me to wait a few more minutes?" he asked gently, as though late arrivals were possible. "This is everyone," I said, my voice flat as stone. "We can proceed." And across town, my sister raised a glass of sparkling wine, congratulating her daughter and future son-in-law, while a DJ announced the couple's first dance. I didn't see it, but I imagined it. I imagined the glow of the chandeliers, the sound of cutlery clinking, the laughter echoing through the banquet hall, and I imagined their excuses already rehearsed in their heads, ready to send later in text messages. "So sorry, Margaret. You know how it is. Matthew would have wanted us to celebrate life." That's what they always say when they choose comfort over compassion. Celebrate life. As if celebrating excuses absence. As if celebrating life at a party somehow cancels the responsibility of mourning death. After the service, we drove to the cemetery in silence. The pastor mumbled his final words as the casket was lowered into the ground. I watched as the ropes tightened, then released, and the box that carried my only child disappeared into darkness. The sound of soil hitting wood will haunt me until the day I join him. 7 people stood there. 7 for a man who had spent weekends fixing his neighbor's fences for free, who had coached Little League when he barely had time for himself, who bought groceries for Mrs. Langley when her arthritis kept her from leaving the house. 7 people for a man who deserved 70. At least. When I came home that night, the silence of the house pressed down on me. His shoes were still by the door, his jacket still hung on the hook. I poured myself a glass of the red wine we used to share on Sunday evenings, and sat at the table where we'd talked about everything and nothing. That's when the phone lit up. 17 missed calls. 40-something unread messages. Not condolences. Not a single apology. Just explanations, excuses, and chatter about the party. "Mom sends her love, but you know she couldn't miss it." Emma was radiant. "Margaret, you would have loved it. We'll come visit the grave next week." And then, from Eleanor herself, the most telling message of all. "Margaret, we need to talk about Matthew's estate. Call me Monday." Not about Matthew. Not about his kindness, his laughter, or the way he made people feel safe. No, about his estate. That was the moment something hardened inside me. The moment I knew my grief wasn't going to be shared by my family. It was going to be exploited. They had chosen canapes over condolences. Now they would come for the one thing Matthew left behind. And I decided, glass of wine trembling in my hand, that if they wanted to treat my son's death like a transaction, I would make sure they paid a price they'd never forget.
Before I continue, I want to ask all of you to please give a like to this video and subscribe to my channel, The Silent Stories, for more stories like mine. Your support means the world to me. Also, I'd love to know where you're watching from, so drop a comment telling me which country you're tuning in from. It's incredible to see how far this community of wonderful people has grown, and I'm so grateful to be able.
The day of Matthew's funeral didn't feel like a day at all. It felt like time had collapsed in on itself, crushing me beneath the weight of things left unsaid. The chapel smelled faintly of polish and dust. The stained glass windows let in streaks of pale light that seemed almost embarrassed to shine on so few of us. The wooden pews creaked under the silence, as if even they were disappointed by the turnout. I sat in the front, hands clenched so tightly around the program that it tore down the middle. The pastor cleared his throat, his voice trembling more than mine. He tried to fill the space with prayers and verses, but there's no verse that explains why a son who lived so fully had to be buried so quietly. Beside me, Mrs. Langley dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. Paul stared at the floor, shoulders shaking every now and then. Sarah, the old girlfriend, held herself stiffly, as if letting go would shatter her completely. And behind us, empty pew after empty pew. Mr. Jennings, the funeral director, leaned toward me again, whispering with that cautious kindness reserved for widows and mothers of the deceased. "Sometimes family runs late," he said. Like maybe the door would swing open and all the people Matthew had loved would pour in, breathless and apologetic. "This is everyone," I replied, my voice sounding strange, like it belonged to someone else. He nodded sadly, and with that, the service began. When the pallbearers lowered the casket into the ground, the ropes made a groaning sound. I'll never forget, the kind of sound that makes you flinch even when you're expecting it. The box slipped down slowly, swallowed by earth, until all that was left was the dull thud of soil being shoveled on top. It struck me then. The last time I had seen Matthew's face was in that hospital bed, pale and gaunt, yet still managing to smile at me with the same grin he'd worn as a boy. And now, less than a week later, the ground was closing over him while half our family clinked glasses in a hall decorated with fairy lights. That image lodged itself in my chest like a splinter. The sound of champagne corks popping at the exact same moment the dirt struck his coffin. Later, after the others drifted away, I stayed behind. I pulled the folding chair Mr. Jennings had set out for me closer to the grave. The air was cold, but I couldn't leave him there alone. I sat for what felt like hours, talking to him the way I always did on Sunday evenings over our shared glass of wine. "You should have seen it, Matthew," I whispered. 7 people. 7, and none of them were blood. The wind rustled the branches above me, carrying with it the faint scent of damp earth. For a second I almost thought I heard his laugh, that deep, rolling laugh that used to echo through our little house, the one that made even bad days bearable. But of course, it was only the wind. By the time I got home, my body felt like lead. The house was too quiet, too full of him. His shoes still sat by the door, the laces untied like he'd meant to slip them on again. His jacket hung from the hook, sleeves crumpled, still smelling faintly of the cologne he wore. I made myself a glass of red wine, the one we used to drink together, and sat at the kitchen table. The mug he'd given me, best son ever, was still there, staring at me like some cruel joke. That's when my phone buzzed to life. First, the 17 missed calls, then the flood of messages, my siblings' names flashing across the screen like vultures circling. Not one of them said, "I'm sorry." Not one said, "I wish I had been there." Instead, Emma looked stunning. "Margaret, you should have seen the dress. Mother sends her love. She couldn't bear to cancel the party. Don't be upset. Matthew would have wanted us to celebrate life." That last line almost made me laugh. Celebrate life. Is that what they called it? Choosing glitter over grief, bubbles over burial. And then Eleanor's message, the one that carved itself into my memory. Margaret, we need to talk about Matthew's estate. Call me Monday. Not about Matthew's life. Not about his smile, his generosity, his quiet strength. Not about the way he gave himself to everyone who needed him. No, about his estate. That was the moment the grief shifted. It didn't disappear, but it hardened into something sharper, something colder. I realized then that my family hadn't just abandoned me at the funeral. They were preparing to circle back, not with flowers or comfort, but with demands. They would come knocking, asking what Matthew left behind, as though his memory was a prize to be divided. I swirled the wine in my glass, staring at its dark color. Matthew's absence filled every corner of the room, but so did his presence, in the mug, in the jacket, in the silence that wasn't really silent at all. "I'll take care of it, son," I whispered, raising the glass slightly toward the ceiling. "I promise you, I'll take care of it." And though I didn't yet know how, I felt something like resolve take root inside me. If they wanted to treat his death as a transaction, I would be the one to make sure it cost them. Monday came, just as Eleanor promised, and with it came the knock on my door. It wasn't gentle. It was the kind of knock that announces itself, that says the person outside already believes they're entitled to enter. When I opened it, there she stood, Eleanor, my sister, immaculately dressed as always, her coat perfectly pressed, her hair arranged into curls that framed a face practiced at showing concern. She had a folder tucked under her arm, and without waiting for me to invite her, she brushed past and settled herself on my couch. "Margaret, we need to talk," she said, adjusting her coat like she was taking her rightful place, "about Matthew's trust fund." Her words hit me like ice water. 3 days. My son had been gone only 3 days, and already she was on my couch, sipping at her words like coffee, eager to redirect his memory into dollar signs. I sat down slowly in the chair across from her, holding my mug as if I needed something to ground me. "What about it?" I asked. Though my voice felt like stone scraping against itself, she leaned forward, eyes bright with calculation. "Emma's wedding is in 6 months. And frankly, that money could make all the difference." I blinked. "Matthew's been gone 3 days, Eleanor. And that's tragic, truly," she replied, her tone full of sympathy so false it made my stomach turn. "But life goes on, doesn't it? Emma's wedding has been planned for years. She deserves something beautiful. Matthew would have wanted her to have it." I stared at her, almost in disbelief. "Would he?" I asked quietly. "Would Matthew, who never once missed a Little League game, who bought groceries for strangers, who said Emma only called when she needed something, would he really want his money spent on flowers and a banquet hall?" For a moment, Eleanor's face faltered. Just for a second, then she straightened, pressing on. "It's not just flowers, Margaret. It's the start of her future. The venue alone costs." I raised my hand. "Spare me the details. Tell me, did Emma enjoy her engagement party?" I heard it was lovely. This time, she looked uncomfortable, her eyes darting toward the window, but only for a heartbeat. "Grace, don't be like that. We wanted to be at Matthew's service. We did. But sometimes life forces difficult choices." "Difficult choices," I repeated slowly, rolling the words around in my mouth like bitter fruit. "Like choosing between burying your nephew and toasting your daughter? That's not fair," she snapped, her polished tone cracking just enough for me to glimpse the impatience beneath. "The party was planned months ago. Deposits, arrangements, all non-refundable. Matthew would have understood. Would he? The boy who called her aunt selfish since he was 15, who laughed whenever she arrived at family events, late and left early. Matthew, who once told me that Eleanor had a talent for showing up only when she smelled opportunity." She reached into her folder, then pulling out some notes she'd scribbled. "Besides," she said, regaining her poise, "Matthew named you executor because he trusted you to do what's best for the family, and what's best right now is helping Emma." There it was. The real reason for her early morning intrusion. Not love, not grief. just the quiet rustle of paper and the weight of entitlement. I kept my face neutral, though inside I felt the heat rising. Matthew left detailed instructions, I said carefully. Her eyes lit up. Exactly, and I'm sure those instructions allow for some flexibility. Emma is the only grandchild left, Margaret. The only one who can carry on the family name. He would have wanted this. The only grandchild left. As if Matthew had never existed. As if his 36 years were an inconvenience, swept aside to make room for Emma's one big day. I rose, walking slowly toward the kitchen. The money is locked for 6 months. I called over my shoulder, buying time to keep my face from betraying me. 6 months. Eleanor's voice cracked. But the wedding is in 6 months. Margaret, you have to do something. Can't you petition the court? I poured myself another cup of coffee, stirring it slowly, listening to her desperation grow. Why is Emma's wedding so urgent? I asked finally, carrying the mug back into the room. Can't they wait a year or two? Her cheeks flushed. They're in love. Young love can't wait. You know how it is. And expensive, apparently, I said softly, watching her squirm. Margaret, please. She reached across the coffee table, lowering her voice as if she were confiding a secret. This wedding means everything to Emma. And to me. After the divorce, after everything I've endured, seeing my daughter happy is all I want. Crocodile tears welled in her eyes, but I'd seen her play this role too many times. Her divorce was her own doing. Running off with her husband's business partner tends to shatter marriages. Yet somehow, Eleanor always found a way to make herself the victim. I set my mug down, letting the silence stretch. Then I smiled, smooth as glass. I'll consider it, I lied. Her whole face lit up, relief flooding in. Really? Oh, Margaret, thank you. I knew you'd understand. Emma will be so thrilled. She gathered her folder, preparing to leave, but then turned at the doorway, her voice casual. Oh, and Margaret, maybe don't mention this to the rest of the family just yet. You know how they get about money. Translation: don't tell anyone else until I find a way to claim it all for myself. Of course, I said with a smile. That didn't reach my eyes. The door shut behind her, and the house sank back into silence. I leaned against the wall, heart pounding, and let the truth settle in. Eleanor wasn't going to stop, and neither would the others, once she whispered her poison in their ears. But what they didn't know was that Matthew had been ready for this. He had warned me, he had trusted me, and I would not let him down. After Eleanor left, I couldn't breathe inside that house. Her perfume still lingered in the air, and the echo of her words, Matthew would have wanted this, clung to me like smoke. So I drove. No plan, no destination, just the need to get out before grief and anger swallowed me whole. My car seemed to know where I was going. Long before I did, by the time I realized it, I was pulling into the cemetery, gravel crunching under the tires. Matthew's grave was still fresh, the soil unsettled, darker than the grass around it. No headstone yet, only a temporary marker with his name printed in simple letters. I carried a small folding chair from the trunk and set it down beside him, as if we were just two old friends sitting down for a chat. I laid fresh flowers against the mound of dirt, white lilies, his favorite, and beside them, a small flag. Matthew had served 2 tours overseas before the cancer claimed him, and though he rarely spoke of it, I knew it was a part of him he carried with quiet pride. I sat and poured my heart out into the cold air. You'll never believe it, Matthew, I said, brushing tears from my face. Your aunt came today. She sends her love and her invoices. She wants your trust fund for Emma's wedding. Can you imagine? Your cousin, who couldn't even send a sympathy card, wants to wear a dress bought with your money. The wind moved through the trees above me, whispering like a voice I almost recognized. And for a moment, I swear I could hear him laughing. That deep, warm laugh that had filled our kitchen so many nights when the world outside felt cruel. Then I opened the folder I had carried with me. Inside were his will, the trust documents, and one more thing. A letter he had written during his final week. His handwriting was shaky, but unmistakably his. Mom, it began. I read slowly. my breath catching on every line. If you're holding this, then I've lost the fight. I'm sorry for leaving you alone with our family. I know how they are, especially Eleanor. She'll come sniffing around the money before the ground has even settled. Please, don't let her twist my memory into something it isn't. I pressed the paper to my lips, eyes flooding. He had known. Of course, he had known. The 300,000, the letter continued, is not for weddings, vacations, or any family expenses. I've set it aside for children who don't get the chances I did. Education, medical help, small hands that need lifting when the world is too heavy. I've already spoken to the Children's Relief Foundation. They'll guide you. The framework is in place. My fingers shook as I read on. Eleanor will tell you I would have wanted Emma to have it. Don't believe her. I wouldn't give Eleanor $1 to save her life, let alone fund one of her daughter's princess parties. But you, Mom, I trust you. I've given you full discretion over the fund. If anyone fights you, remind them kindness during life earns consideration after death. They made their choices. Now, they can live with the consequences. I set the letter down and covered my face with my hands, letting the sobs come. This wasn't just money. It was Matthew's last act of defiance, his final way of protecting me from the wolves he knew would come knocking. Even from the grave, he was still shielding me. When I could finally see through the blur of tears, I folded the letter carefully and returned it to the folder. Then I whispered aloud, "You were right, son. You always were, and I promise you, they will not win." On the drive home, my phone buzzed. A new message from Emma. Aunt Margaret, it read. Mom told me the amazing news about Uncle Matthew's gift for my wedding. Can we go dress shopping together this weekend? I want to show you the one I've been dreaming of. The words sat on my screen like stones. She had no idea what her mother had already spun out of thin air. I typed back slowly, "We'll talk soon, sweetheart." Almost instantly, another bubble appeared. OMG, yes, this is going to be the perfect wedding. Uncle Matthew would be so happy to see us celebrating life instead of being sad. Celebrating life. I nearly dropped the phone. Is that what we were calling it now? Using the dead to justify indulgence? I turned into the driveway and shut off the car, staring at the dark windows of the house that no longer felt like home. Inside those walls, Matthew's memory lived in every corner. His laugh, his jacket, the half-read books still lying on the table. And now, that memory was under siege. I touched the folder on the passenger seat. Matthew had trusted me to guard his last wish, and as his mother, I couldn't imagine a greater honor or a heavier burden. I whispered into the still night, "Don't worry, son. I understand the assignment. They want to play games with your memory. Then they'll play with me. And they'll lose." That was the night I stopped being simply a grieving mother. That was the night I became his shield. It didn't take long for Eleanor to spread the word. By Tuesday evening, my doorbell rang again, and this time it wasn't just her. Tom arrived first, his salesman's smile already plastered on his face, the kind that promises sincerity while his eyes measure what he can take. 10 minutes later, Carol walked in, carrying that same expression she'd worn since childhood whenever she wanted something. Soft, practiced concern that never quite reached her eyes. They didn't bother with pleasantries. Tom went straight to the point. "Margaret, we heard you might be having some trouble managing Matthew's estate." I offered them coffee. They declined. That told me everything. This wasn't a condolence visit. This was an intervention. "Trouble?" I asked, settling into my chair. "What kind of trouble?" Tom cleared his throat. "Eleanor mentioned you've been emotional, which is understandable. But sometimes grief clouds judgment. We thought we could help." Carol leaned forward, voice dripping with sympathy. "We just want to make sure you're not making any rash decisions. Matthew's assets could really benefit the family if they're handled wisely." There it was again. Not Matthew, not his life, not his wishes. Assets. As if he were a bank account instead of a man who had lived and breathed and laughed among us. What assets would those be? I asked. Though I already knew the answer. "The trust fund," Carol said bluntly. Eleanor told us it's substantial, and we think it would be fairest to distribute it among the grandchildren. That way, everyone benefits equally. I almost smiled. Fairness. That was their angle. As if Matthew's money was Halloween candy to be divided, so no one felt left out. Tom, I said calmly, your kids are in their 40s. Carol, yours are in their 20s with jobs. Emma is the only one even close to marriage. Why would they need money? Carol's expression tightened. It's not about need, it's about fairness. Daniel wouldn't want to play favorites. Matthew, I corrected softly. My son's name deserved to be remembered, even if his family wanted to erase it. Tom jumped in quickly, sensing Carol had slipped. Look, Margaret, you're not getting any younger. Managing a large sum like that can be stressful. We could take that burden off your hands. The burden, my own son's final wishes, reduced to paperwork they thought I was too old to handle. I set my mug down with deliberate care. That's very considerate. But I think I can manage. Carol's tone shifted then, the sympathy peeling away. Be reasonable, Margaret. You live alone. You've just lost your son. This isn't the time to be stubborn. Stubborn, I repeated, my voice sharp enough to cut the air. Like insisting on attending my son's funeral, while the rest of you chose champagne over condolences. The room fell silent. Tom studied his shoes. Carol suddenly found the ceiling fascinating. You want to talk about difficult choices? I stood, moving toward the mantel, where Matthew's photograph sat beside his service medal. His smile looked down at us, still full of warmth. Difficult choices are deciding whether to take your son off life support. Difficult choices are choosing a casket when he should have been picking out a birthday cake. Difficult choices are sitting alone at a funeral because your family cared more about a party. That's what difficult looks like. When I turned back, both of them had paled, but I wasn't finished. And now, you want to make another choice. You want to take the money he set aside for children who will never know his kindness and spend it on dresses and vacations. Tell me, does that feel fair to you? Tom's jaw tightened. Eleanor said he left it to the family. Eleanor lied. The words hung heavy between us. For once, neither of them had a quick reply. Finally, Carol pushed her chair back, her voice sharp. Fine, keep it all for yourself, but don't expect us to be there when you're old and need care. I laughed, an actual laugh, bitter and hollow. When have any of you ever been there? When Matthew was sick, did you visit? When I planned his funeral alone, did you offer help? When I cried myself to sleep, did you check on me? No, so forgive me if your threats about abandonment don't carry much weight. You've already perfected the art of absence. They gathered their coats in silence, muttering something about my being unreasonable, and walked out the door. When the house fell quiet again, I sank into my chair, exhausted but unshaken. This was only the beginning. I knew it. Eleanor wouldn't stop. Tom and Carol might retreat for now, but their hunger was lit, and behind them, I could feel the whole family circling, waiting for their chance to sink their teeth into Matthew's memory. But they had underestimated one thing. They thought I was fragile. They thought I was weak, lost in grief, easy to sway. They had forgotten that I was Matthew's mother, and Matthew had left me with the strength of his last words, the fire of his trust. Let them come. I was ready. It was Emma who surprised me. Late Friday morning, the doorbell rang again. I almost didn't answer, half expecting another ambush from Eleanor or one of the others. But when I opened it, there stood Emma. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her shoulders hunched, a Starbucks cup clutched so tightly in her hand. The cardboard sleeve was crumpling. "Aunt Margaret," she said softly, "can we talk?" I stepped aside and let her in. She sat on the very edge of the couch, like a guest in her own family, her hands twisted around the cup, her engagement ring flashing under the lamplight. "Mom told me about the trust fund," she began. Her voice cracked on the word trust, and she bit her lip before going on. She said, "Uncle Matthew wanted to help with my wedding, that you were being difficult." I sat across from her, letting the silence stretch. Years of raising Matthew had taught me that when you wait, people reveal more than they mean to. Emma's shoulders slumped. "But something doesn't feel right." My heart softened. For all her mother's greed, Emma was still just a young woman caught in the tide. What doesn't feel right, sweetheart? She stared down into her coffee, swirling it absent-mindedly. Uncle Matthew never really liked Brandon. They only met once at Christmas. And afterward, he told me Brandon was more interested in himself than anyone else. I didn't respond. Matthew had said worse things in private. A trust fund boy, with the personality of wet cardboard. But that wasn't what Emma needed to hear right now. Instead, I asked gently, "Tell me about Brandon." Her face brightened for a moment. Almost automatically, "He's handsome. His family's well off. They own clubs and businesses. He went to a good school. Mom says I'm lucky to have caught him." "And what do you say?" I asked quietly. The question seemed to catch her off guard. She blinked, then looked down again. "I don't know. I think I love the idea of him. The way people look at us when we walk into a room. The way Mom talks about the match. It feels like validation." Her voice trailed off, and her eyes filled again. "But sometimes I wonder if he'd even notice if I were replaced by another girl who looked like me and nodded at all the right times." The confession broke my heart. I reached across the table and took her hand. "Emma, whose wedding is this?" She gave a shaky laugh. "Mine, I suppose. But it doesn't feel like it. Mom's been planning everything. Brandon's mother keeps adding guests. No one's asked me what I want." "And what do you want?" Her answer came out in a whisper. "Something small, maybe on the beach. Just close family and friends. I wanted Uncle Matthew to walk me down the aisle, since Grandpa's gone. But now," her voice cracked, and she buried her face in her hands. I handed her a box of tissues. "Sweetheart, you don't have to go through with a circus just because your mother thinks it's her chance to shine, but she's paying for it," Emma murmured. "And she keeps saying this is my chance for a better life, that Brandon's family will open doors for me." I took a deep breath and reached for the folder on the table. Inside was Matthew's letter, the one that had already saved me from drowning in their demands. I found the section I was looking for and slid the paper across to her. "Read this," I said softly. Emma wiped her eyes and read aloud, her voice trembling. "If Emma is reading this, I hope she remembers she's smart enough to make her own choices and strong enough to stand by them. Don't let anyone else write the story of your life, not even your mother." Emma's tears fell freely now, but these were different. They weren't only grief, they were recognition. "He really wrote this," she whispered. "He did. He wanted you to know he believed in you. He wanted you to be free." She pressed the letter to her chest. "I wish he were here. He always made me feel safe, like I didn't have to pretend." I nodded. "He also wanted you to know that if you ever felt trapped by family expectations, you could reach out to someone who understood." He mentioned his friend Sarah. "She's a therapist. She helps young women find their own voices. Would you like her number?" Emma hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yes, I think I need that." I scribbled Sarah's number on a slip of paper and handed it to her. Emma clutched it like a lifeline. "Thank you, Aunt Margaret. For the first time in months, I feel like I can breathe." When she left that afternoon, the house felt a little less heavy. For the first time since Matthew's death, I felt the faint stirrings of hope. Maybe his voice could still guide someone, even from beyond the grave. I poured myself a small glass of wine and raised it toward the ceiling. "You're still helping us, son," I whispered. "Even now." But deep inside, I knew the storm wasn't over. Emma's doubts would soon collide with Eleanor's ambitions. And when that happened, the real battle would begin. The next twist came when I least expected it. It was a gray Thursday morning, the kind where the sky looks like it's holding back tears. I was in the kitchen sorting through a stack of paperwork when the doorbell rang. I assumed it was another sibling ready to lecture me. But when I opened the door, it wasn't family at all. A woman stood there, mid-30s, sharp but polite, a briefcase in one hand. "Mrs. Whitfield?" she asked. "Yes, my name's Claire Donovan. I'm a reporter with the County Journal. I wonder if I could ask you some questions about the family your niece is marrying into." Her words sent a chill through me. "Brandon's family," she nodded. "The Lamberts." I hesitated, my hand still on the doorframe. What about them? I'm working on a piece about charity fraud and financial misconduct, she said carefully. The Lambert family has been under quiet federal investigation for nearly a year. I think you deserve to know before your niece walks into something she can't walk out of. I let her in. My knees felt weak, so I guided her to the table and poured us both coffee, even though my hands shook as I set down the cups. She opened her briefcase and slid a folder across to me. Inside were photocopies of federal documents, IRS letters and charts that made my head spin. The Lambert Foundation, she explained, has claimed millions in charitable donations over the past 5 years. On paper, they look like generous philanthropists. But most of the money never reached the hospitals or schools they promised. Instead, it was routed into offshore accounts. I stared at the documents, hardly able to believe what I was reading. And Brandon? I asked quietly. His father runs the foundation. Brandon himself is listed as assistant director. He's not just aware of what's happening, he's part of it. We believe they target families with inheritances or large estates. They encourage quick engagements, extravagant weddings, and joint accounts. Once they gain access, the money disappears. My stomach dropped. The puzzle pieces clicked together with terrifying clarity. The timing of the engagement, Eleanor's sudden obsession with the trust fund, the pressure to release money quickly. Claire, I whispered. You think they targeted Emma? She met my eyes and didn't flinch. Yes. The engagement came just months after Matthew's illness became public. Your niece is young, impressionable, and as far as the Lamberts know, attached to a family with access to $300,000. From where we stand, she's the perfect mark. I pressed my palms flat against the table, willing myself not to cry. Emma's tear-streaked face from the other day flashed in my mind. Her whisper, I think I love the idea of him. What happens if she marries him? I asked, my voice barely audible. Claire sighed. At best, she loses herself, her independence, her money, her future. At worst, she becomes legally entangled in federal fraud. Even if she never signed a document knowingly, the law won't protect her completely. I leaned back, closing my eyes. Dear God. Then I remembered something. Emma's excited text, Mom says Uncle Matthew's gift will cover the wedding. And the way she admitted Brandon had asked detailed questions about the trust fund. I looked at Claire. He already knows. Emma told him about the money. Her pen froze above her notebook. Everything, I whispered. How much? Who controls it? That there's a legal process involved. He's been studying it, hasn't he? Claire exhaled sharply. That confirms our suspicions. They move quickly when they smell opportunity. And if they know there's resistance, they might push harder. I thought of Emma sitting on my couch, wringing her hands, confessing she was scared. She wasn't just scared of a wedding she didn't want. Somewhere deep down, she must have sensed something darker. I set my jaw. She needs to know. Today, Claire hesitated. Mrs. Whitfield, you must be careful. If Brandon or his parents suspect she's aware, they may try to isolate her or rush the wedding. She needs to act normal until law enforcement can intervene. But I was already reaching for my phone. Emma answered on the second ring. Her voice cheerful, distracted. Aunt Margaret, can I call you later? Brandon's taking me to meet the caterer. No, I said firmly, sharper than I meant to. Emma, listen to me. Come to the house. Now, it's urgent. Something in my tone must have reached her, because after a long pause she said, All right, I'll be there in an hour. When she arrived, I introduced her to Claire. I watched the color drain from her face as Claire laid out the documents, the investigation, the truth. That's impossible, Emma whispered. They donate to hospitals, schools, churches. Everyone respects them. They pretend to donate. Claire corrected gently. The money never arrives. It goes straight into their pockets. Emma, if you marry into this family, you risk losing everything. And worse, you risk being dragged into their crimes. Emma shook her head, her hands trembling. Brandon wouldn't. He couldn't. Sweetheart, I said softly. How many times has Brandon asked you about Matthew's money? Her lips parted, then closed again. Tears welled in her eyes. Almost every time we talked about the wedding. He wanted to know if it could be released before the ceremony. He even suggested setting up a joint account. Claire nodded grimly. That's their pattern. That's how they do it. Emma pressed her fists to her forehead. I have to get out. I can't marry him. You will, Claire said firmly. But carefully. You can't let them know yet. For now, you smile. You nod. You pretend. Law enforcement is watching closely. Let them protect you. Emma looked at me, terrified. What do I do? I took her hands in mine. You do what Matthew wanted you to do. You make your own choice. And this time, you choose yourself. Her tears fell freely, but her voice steadied. Then I choose not to marry him. No matter what it costs. For the first time since Matthew's death, I felt hope take root in my chest. He had always been the protector, and now, through his words, through his foresight, he was still protecting her. The wolves had come, but they had picked the wrong family. 2 weeks later, I found myself sitting in Judge Avery's courtroom. The air was heavy with whispers, the kind that ripple like waves before a storm. At the table opposite me sat Eleanor, flanked by her lawyer, Mr. Blackwell. He was slick, expensive-looking, with the smug confidence of a man who thought money could rewrite truth. My own lawyer, Miss Green, sat beside me, her calm presence a steady anchor. She'd warned me Eleanor's argument would be brutal, that I was grieving, irrational, unfit to manage Matthew's trust fund. That family came first, and family meant Emma's wedding. When the proceedings began, Blackwell wasted no time. Your Honor, he said smoothly, my client only wishes to ensure her daughter's future. Mrs. Whitfield has shown signs of distress and erratic behavior since her son's passing. It is our belief she is not competent to manage a substantial estate. I almost laughed. My so-called erratic behavior was refusing to fund a party. Miss Green rose, her voice sharp as glass. Your Honor, what my colleague fails to mention is that the deceased left explicit, notarized instructions. Instructions that earmarked every cent of that trust for a children's charity. Mrs. Whitfield is honoring those wishes. That is not incompetence. That is integrity. The judge's eyes flicked toward Eleanor. Did you know about these instructions? Eleanor shifted in her seat, her face flushing. I only heard vague details. My brother loved Emma. He would have wanted to help her. Then why? Miss Green asked coolly. Did he write in his own hand that he wouldn't give you $1 to save your life, let alone fund your daughter's wedding? Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Eleanor's mouth opened and closed, but no words came. And then came the blow she never saw coming. Midway through the hearing, the door opened, and 2 federal agents entered. They handed the judge a packet of documents. He scanned them, his brows lifting higher with every page. These, he said slowly, detail an ongoing federal investigation into the Lambert family, your daughter's future in-laws, fraud, tax evasion and misappropriation of charitable funds. Mrs. Whitfield's refusal to release her son's trust fund may have prevented this money from being stolen. The room went silent. Even Blackwell lost his polished composure, flipping through his notes like a drowning man searching for a rope. Eleanor turned pale, her confidence crumbling. The judge leaned forward, his tone firm. Based on the evidence, I see no grounds to question Mrs. Whitfield's competency. Quite the opposite. She has protected her son's legacy from potential fraud. The petition to release or redistribute the trust is denied. Case dismissed. The gavel struck. And just like that, the battle was over. Eleanor avoided my gaze as she left. Her shoulders hunched, her once perfect posture bent beneath the weight of her defeat. For the first time, I almost felt pity. Almost. Emma, however, waited for me outside the courthouse. Her face was pale but determined. She threw her arms around me, whispering, "It's over. I called off the wedding. Brandon's furious, but I don't care. I feel free." I held her tightly. "You chose yourself, sweetheart. That's all Matthew ever wanted for you." In the weeks that followed, the family fractured further. Tom and Carol retreated into silence, embarrassed by their earlier attempts to pressure me. Eleanor avoided me entirely, though I heard whispers she was drowning in debt. Emma stayed in touch, slowly rebuilding her life. Seeing Sarah, the therapist Matthew had suggested. For the first time, she was making choices without her mother's shadow looming over her. And as for Matthew's fund, it began to work almost immediately. The Children's Relief Foundation sent me their first report within 6 months. 39 children had received medical assistance. 12 had enrolled in schools they never could have afforded. Letters from parents arrived, full of gratitude for a man they had never met, but who had changed their children's lives. I visited Matthew's grave, one quiet evening with the report in hand. The headstone was finally in place. Matthew Whitfield, beloved son, loyal friend, fierce heart. I laid fresh flowers, unfolded the report, and read aloud the names of the children his money had helped. I imagined him listening, that deep laugh rolling through the air, proud of what he had set in motion. "Well, son," I whispered, brushing soil from the stone, "your plan worked. Eleanor tried to twist your memory, but she failed. Emma found her voice. And now dozens of children are getting the chance you wanted for them. You were right about everything." The wind stirred the trees above, carrying the faintest echo of his laughter. When I stood to leave, my phone buzzed. A message from Emma. "Aunt Margaret, I wanted you to be the first to know. I met someone. His name's Daniel. He's kind, steady, nothing flashy. We're taking it slow. No big plans yet. Just seeing where life takes us. Uncle Matthew would have liked him." I smiled through my tears, typing back. "He already does." For the first time since that terrible day, I walked back to my car with something lighter in my chest. Grief was still there. It always would be. But so was hope. Matthew was gone. But his voice, his laughter, his love, those things remained. And now, so did his legacy.